everybody. It's me, and I'm back again today with Trumpet of the Swan. We're on Chapter 5 called Lewis. You can see there's the swans, and the cygnets. And when I read this chapter to you, we're going to come across some language that is very old-fashioned language that we don't use anymore. And when we get to it, I'd like to explain it to you and why we don't use it anymore and what we do use instead. But it's important that we read this chapter together so you can understand the rest of the story. Let's just begin and we'll talk about those words when we get to them. Chapter 5, Lewis. One evening, a few weeks later, when the cygnets were asleep, the swan said to the cob, "Have you noticed anything different about one of our children, the one we call Lewis?" "Different," replied the cob. "In what way is Lewis different from his brothers and sisters? Lewis looks all right to me. He is growing well. He swims and dives. He eats well. He will soon have all his flight feathers." "Oh, no, he looks all right," said the swan, "and heaven knows he eats enough. He is healthy and bright and a great swimmer. But have you ever heard Lewis make a sound as the others do? Have you ever heard him use his voice? Have you ever heard him utter a single beep or a single burble?" "Come to think of it, I never have," replied the cob, who was beginning to look worried. "Have you ever heard Lewis say good night to us as the others do? Have you ever heard him say good morning as the others do in their charming little way, burbling and beeping?" "Now that you mention it, I never have," said the cob. "Goodness, what are you getting at? Do you wish me to believe that I have a child who has a problem?" "Such a revelation would distress me greatly. I want everything to go smoothly in my family life so that I can glide gracefully and serenely now in the prime of my life without being haunted by worry or anxiety. Parenthood is quite a burden at best. I do not want the added strain of having a child who has a problem." "Well," said his mate, "I have been watching Lewis a lot lately. It is my opinion that this little fellow can't talk. I have never heard him make a sound. I think he came into the world lacking a voice. If he had a voice, he would use it the same way the others do." "What? This is terrible," said the cob. "This is distressing beyond words. This is a very serious matter." His wife looked at him in amusement. "It's not too serious," she said, "but it will be serious a year or two from now when Lewis is ready to have a mate. All young male swans will be greatly handicapped in finding a mate if they are unable to make a sound. If he can't utter the usual endearments to a young female of his choice, she won't know he's there." "Are you sure?" asked the cob. "Certainly I am sure," she replied. "I can remember perfectly well in the springtime many years ago when you fell in love with me and began chasing after me. What a sight you were and what a lot of noise you made. It was in Montana. Do you remember?" "Of course I remember," said the cob. "Well, the thing that attracted me most to you was your voice, your wonderful voice." "It was?" said the cob. "Yes. You had a fine, powerful voice, the most resonant voice of any of the young swans in the Red Rock Lake National Wildlife Refuge in Montana." "I did?" said the cob. "Yes, indeed. Every time I heard you say something in that deep voice of yours, I was ready to go with you. "You were?" said the cob. He was obviously delighted with his mate's praise. It tickled his vanity and made him feel great. He had always fancied himself as having a fine voice, and now to hear it from his mate's own lips was a real thrill. In the pleasure of the moment, he forgot all about Louis and thought entirely of himself. And of course, he did remember that enchanted springtime on the lake in Montana when he had fallen in love. He remembered his mate and how attractive she was, how desirable. And now he realized fully that they would have never been able to meet if he had been unable to say anything. "Well, let's not worry about Louis for the time being," said the swan. "He is still very young, but we must watch him this next winter when we are in Montana for the season. We must stay together as a family until we see how Louis makes out." She walked over to where her sleeping cygnets were settled down and cuddled up next to them. The night was chill. Carefully she lifted one wing and covered the cygnets with it. They stirred in their sleep and drew close to her. The cob stood quietly thinking about what his mate had just told him. He was a brave, noble bird, and already he was beginning to work out a plan for his little son Louis. "If it is really true that Louis has no voice," said the cob to himself, "then I shall provide him with a device of some sort to enable him to make a lot of noise. There must be some way out of this difficulty. After all, my son is a trumpeter swan. He should have a voice like a trumpet. But first I will test him to make certain that what his mother says is true." The cob was unable to sleep that night. He stood on one leg quietly, but sleep never came. The next morning, after everyone enjoyed a good breakfast, he led Louis apart from the others. "Louis," he said, "I wish to speak to you in private. Let's just you and I take a swim by ourselves to the other end of the pond where we can talk privately without being interrupted." Louis felt surprised by this, but he nodded his head and followed his father, swimming strongly in his wake. He did not understand why his father wanted to speak to him alone, without his brothers and sisters there. "Now," said the cob when they reached the upper end of the pond, "here we are, gracefully floating, supremely buoyant, at some distance from the others, in perfect surroundings. A fine morning, with the pond quiet except for the song of blackbirds making the air sweet. I wish my father would get to the point," thought Louis. "This is an ideal place for our conference," continued the cob. "There is something I feel I should discuss with you very candidly and openly, something that concerns your future. We need not range over the whole spectrum of bird life, but we will confine our talk to one essential thing that is before us on this unusual occasion." "Oh, I wish my father would get to the point," thought Louis, who by this time was getting very nervous. "It has come to my attention, Louis," continued the cob, "that you rarely say anything. In fact, I can't recall ever hearing you utter a sound. I have never heard you speak or say coo or cry out, either in fear or in joy. This is most unusual for a young trumpeter. It is serious, Louis. Louis, let me hear you say beep. Go ahead, say beep." Poor Louis. While his father watched, he took a deep breath and opened his mouth and just let the air out, hoping that he could say beep. But there wasn't a sound. "Try again, Louis," said his father. "Perhaps you're not trying hard enough." Louis tried again, but it was no use. No sound came from his throat. He shook his head sadly. "Watch me," said the cob. He raised his neck to his full height and cried out, "Caw!" so loud it was heard by every creature for miles around. "Now let me hear you say beep," he commanded. "Say beep, Louis, loud and clear." Louis tried, but he couldn't beep. This picture. Let's see the cob and Louis. "Let me hear you burble. Go ahead and burble, like this. Burble, burble, burble." Louis tried to burble, but he couldn't do it. No sound came out. "Well," said the cob, "I guess it is no use. I guess you are dumb." That's the word we're going to talk about. Let me read this paragraph, and then we're going to come back to talk about that. When Louis heard the word dumb, he felt like crying. The cob saw that that word had hurt Louis's feelings. "You misunderstand me, my child," he said in a comforting voice. "You fail to understand. The word dumb has two meanings. If I had called you dumb, it would have meant that I had a poor opinion of your intelligence. Actually, I think that you are one of the brightest, smartest, most intelligent cygnets I have ever met. Words sometimes have two meanings. The word dumb is one such word. A person who can't see is called blind, a person who can't hear is called deaf, and a person who can't speak is called dumb. That is not true anymore. This book was written a very long, long time ago, and since it was written, we have changed our language. Today, the word dumb only has one meaning, and it means to have a poor opinion of someone's intelligence. The word that we would use today if someone did not have a voice is that they have mutism. But we never use the word dumb to refer to someone who doesn't have a voice because it can hurt people's feelings just like it hurt Louis's feelings. So we stopped using language in that way. The reason I read that is so that you can have an example of how language can change over time. The father then asks, "Do you understand, Louis?" Louis nodded his head. He felt better, and he was grateful to his father for explaining to him that the word had two meanings. But still, he felt awfully strange. "Do not let sadness settle over you, Louis," said the cob. "Be cheerful. Be brave. Remember, the world is full of youngsters who have some sort of problem that they must overcome. You apparently have a problem speaking. I am sure you can overcome it in time. There may even be some slight advantage at your age, not being able to say anything. It might help you to become a good listener. The world is full of talkers, but it is rare to find someone who listens. And I assure you that you can pick up more information when you are listening than when you are talking." My father does quite a lot of talking himself, thought Louis. "Some people," continued the cob, "go through life chattering and making a lot of noise with their mouth, but they never really listen to anything. They are too busy expressing their opinions, which are often unsound or based on bad information. Therefore, my child, be of good cheer. Enjoy life. Learn to fly. Eat well. Drink well. Use your ears. Use your eyes. And I promise that someday I will make it possible for you to use your voice. There are mechanical devices that convert air into beautiful sounds. One such device is called a trumpet. I saw a trumpet once in my travels. I think you may need a trumpet in order to live a full life. I have never known a trumpeter swan to need a trumpet, but your case is different. I intend to get you what you need. I don't know how I will manage this, but in the fullness of time it shall be accomplished. And now that our talk has come to a close, let us return gracefully to the other end of the pond, where your mother and your brothers and sisters await us. The cob turned and swam off. Louis followed. It had been an unhappy morning for him. He felt scared at being different from his brothers and sisters. He didn't understand why he had come into the world without a voice. All of his brothers and sisters had a voice. Why shouldn't he? Fate is cruel, he thought. Fate is cruel to me. Then he remembered that his father had promised to help him, and he felt better. Soon they joined the others, and everyone started to play water games, and Louis joined in, dipping and splashing, diving and twisting. Louis could splash water further than any of the others, but he couldn't shout while he was doing it. To be able to shout while you are splashing water is half the fun. That's the end of that page. That's the end of the chapter. Chapter 6 is called Off to Montana. And that is the chapter we'll read tomorrow. That chapter has a lot of fun information in it because it talks about how to learn how to fly. If any of you are interested in learn to fly, I think you'll really like that next chapter. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.